Hello, here we are again to talk about WordPress, and this is where I'm at so far with this Nob Hill Gazette theme. And we've created the logo, we've got our navigation here, still needs some work. And then we just added this picture, right? And we just sized this using the image sizes under Settings Media. And right now, the image, as you can see, like if I zoom out a little bit here, you can see it's kind of all the way on the left side of the page. And that's because we have, we've used the grid system here on the header for the logo and the menu here, but we haven't applied the grid to the rest of the page. Now, the grid works by applying classes to elements where we're going to say the size of the element in percent in increments of 5%, right? And all of the grid classes must be inside of a grid container. And if I look at the header PHP here, you can see that I've created a grid container here, class grid container, and my grid container actually begins here and it ends right down here. And you can see when I click on this in brackets, like it highlights these two tags because this is the opening and that's the closing tag, right? And then I have this ID main content, and then after this is where the main part of the page is going to be, right? So it's going to happen after this guy, right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get the main part of my page inside of the grid container. And we could add the grid container class here to this tag if we like, or we could put a grid container here inside of home page, right? So I think I'm going to take the first route, and let me point out really quickly here that I'm going to go back to fetch and open up footer PHP in brackets here. I really like brackets. You guys should all try brackets as a code editor. Any moment now. There we go, right? Let me make this a little bit smaller here. Okay, so understand that the header file, right, is imported, like this header.php is imported into every page. So home page template is the one, or homepage.php is the template that we're looking at here. The header is this part of the page, and the footer right now is just this line. And then the middle part here, the picture and this content, is what's in the middle of the page. It's the content of the page. And when I look at my files here, you can see that the header PHP contains, the doc type HTML head tag. And then it has this header stuff here, which represents the logo and the blog description and the navigation, right? And this is imported into homepage PHP via this tag right here that says get header. Okay, so this tag right here is going out and it's getting the file called header PHP, and you could think essentially copy and pasting the contents of that file right here, okay? And at the bottom of this file, again, we're in homepage.php. At the bottom here, there is a tag that says get footer, right? And what this does is the same thing as get header, except in this case, it goes out and it gets footer.php. And footer PHP looks like this, right? So it's just got the closing body and HTML tags. And then it has this this closing div. So this closing div says end content. I'll put the hashtag in front of it, right? So this is ends. This is the end tag or closing tag for the content div. And so if we look at header, we have this opening content div here, and then the closing one is in footer. And if we look at homepage, we're importing the header at the top here, so you can imagine everything that we're importing here, and at the bottom of this, right, at the bottom of everything we imported here, it will have the div that has content, ID content, and then here, when we import the footer, it'll have the closing tag for that content div. So essentially, the content div will surround everything here, right? Okay, so that said, let's go back to header, and what I'd like to do is on this content div, I'm going to give it the class name grid container. Okay, and so I'll save it, and then I'll go back to my page here and refresh it, and refresh it a couple times. Sometimes it takes a few tries. There we go, right? So now you can see that the content of my page, includes the picture and the text here. And now this is centered on the page because it's in a grid container, right? So grid container essentially sets up a width that's 1200 pixels wide, and gives it margin auto to center the contents, right? And grid container is part of the unsemantic grid class, so it works with those classes. So you need to you need to be using the unsemantic grid if you're going to use grid container class, right? So anyway, you can see the footer is still not aligned with the rest of the page. So let's add the grid container around the footer, right? So I'm going to go back to brackets here, find footer PHP, and my footer is all of this stuff. This WP footer is a special tag for WordPress, and we should put that last in our document. So don't include this in any of your HTML. So this is the ending tag for the container div, right, that we just talked about. And now what I'd like to do is this area down here for footer, I'd like to wrap this in another div. So there's a closing tag. I'm going to remove that and place it here at the bottom. And then maybe I'll tab this once so I can see that it's it's nested inside this tag. And then this tag right here, we'll give it class name grid container. And so let me save that. And then I'll refresh my page here, and now you can see the footer is aligned on the grid, right? So that set this up pretty good. We'll do more with this, right? So far, I've got, I'm trying to do my layout here, right? And I've got the logo, the navigation, the picture, and then the content. And then in here, I want to add these 3 boxes that will be maybe some, posts with an image, right? And then I'll have a footer down here at the bottom, right? So anyway, so thanks for watching, and I hope that helps you out with the grid and setting up your grid. And we'll talk more about the grid in the next few videos. Just as a note, actually maybe before we're done here, let's finish a little bit here. So all of this is now inside of a grid, right? And our loop right here begins with if have posts, and it ends with end while. So really, this is the content for the page, okay? And this is what we're seeing right here, in the middle where it's got the picture and the text, right? So the picture right here is coming from this post thumbnail, right? And then the content below it is in this content div. So what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to wrap all of this stuff in another div tag. And we don't want to close that one here. We want to close it down here at the bottom, right? So it's got to be inside the loop still, right? Okay. And what we'll do is we'll give this, let's actually use the PHP, and then brackets doesn't want to help me with the PHP there, so we'll make sure we spell it right. And then we'll say post class. And what this is going to do is it's going to add some class names for each post. And it's kind of nice to have that because then WordPress will generate class names for our posts, and that can be useful for us when we style our pages. So we'll put this here. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to put this image right here in the grid and make it make it take up 100% of the grid. So I'm going to add a second class name here, grid 100, And then the content down here, I want to put that in the grid 2. And what I'm going to do, let me do this right. I'm going to close this thing down here, right? So I've got another div around the content. So now the content of my post will appear here. And maybe, I want to bring this in a little bit. So, remember if we look at the, let me actually just type the class name here. So I want to put, grid something here, right? But what I think I want to do with the content is rather than have this content here go all the way to the edge, I want to bring it in some percentage or some number of grid columns, right? And if we look at the unsemantic grid and we go to their demo, you can see that each column is a 5%, right? So here's a 10%. So if I want to bring in the content, 10% or 15% or 20%, I can do that, right? So maybe I want the center column to be, well, I don't know, let's make it 80% wide, okay? So I'll type in grid 80, right? And, when I do that and I refresh it here, we're not going to see much change. Let me make sure I get it to refresh. Yeah, there we go, right? So I'm not going to see much change here, but if I inspect the content, right, which is the text there, right? When I inspect it with grid 80, you can see that the blue area is showing me that, this box only takes up 80% of the width. So what I'd like to do is take 10% and put some, 10% column on this side to push this in, and then finish off the rest here with 10%. So the whole column, or the whole width of this area is 100%, but the text in the middle is just filling in an 80% wide area, right? So here's what we'll do. So I've got grid 80, and if you ever have a grid unit and you want to add some space on one side or the other, if you want to put space on the left, add prefix. So I'm going to add prefix 10%, and then I'll add suffix 10%. So suffix goes on the right side. So here I've added, essentially I think this is done as padding, right, in the grid system. So this is adding a 10% padding on the left and a 10% padding on the right, okay? And then I'll refresh it here a few times and get it to any moment there. This is frustrating. Sometimes it takes a minute to update. Let me make sure I saved that, right? I'm pretty sure I saved it, but sometimes it helps if you click, if you're working with fetch, if you click on fetch, that'll kick this and make sure it uploads your file. Oh, there we go, right? So now if I look here, you can see that what I have here is I have grid 80%. I guess it actually does this as prefix and suffix as margin. So you can see the orange area shows a 10% margin on as the prefix on the right side or the left side, and then the suffix is a 10% margin. It's orange on the right, okay? So anyway, so thanks for watching, and I hope that's helpful, and that explains, I'm hoping it explains prefix, suffix, and gives you another, a little more idea on how to use the grid system.